through the National Taxi Workers Alliance, is affiliated with the AFL-CIO. And we're here to talk about Uber and workers' rights and technology and the public. Before we start, Steve Zeltzer, who is the guy in charge of LaborFest, would like to say a few words, and I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, I'm with LaborFest, I'm the organizing committee. We're happy to support events like this, which is about the issues of working people. And we face a real attack on all working people in this country by these companies like Uber and others who basically want to destroy working people for more profits, make everybody a temporary worker, a gig worker, and have everybody on the margins. So LaborFest takes place every July, remembering the San Francisco general strike, which started by transportation workers, longshoremen, maritime workers, for a union hiring hall, so that workers did not have to be in a shape-up every morning to go to work. So it was successful, and we wanted to commemorate that because workers still have the power, they have to use it. They haven't. The last general strike was in 1946, a long time ago, in Oakland, and we commemorate that as well. So we're happy to have this event on taxi cab drivers, and it's not just a local and national issue, it's an international issue. I covered the protest, the global protest at Uber that was held, and there were there were drivers there from Uber from all over the world. So this is an issue facing working people throughout the world, and I think it's important that we examine it, how it's affecting people, and what we can do to defend working people. So you can join LaborFest, get on the mailing list, get a brochure, and if you have events that you would like to have in the future, let us know. We maybe have it in the calendar. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panel. I want to say a few introductory words. And the first thing I will mention is that everybody on this panel is currently a San Francisco cab driver, and some have previously worked for Uber or Lyft or both. We wanted to invite a worker from Uber, and we contacted the Teamsters who are representing some Uber drivers in their own battles with Uber, hoping to get somebody who is currently an Uber driver on this panel, and in their infinite wisdom, I guess the Teamsters decided that they would not furnish a representative from the Teamsters itself or a driver that they are representing. So we do not have a current Uber driver on this panel, but I think you're going to hear a lot about Uber from people who have worked for it and people who have basically been bearing the brunt of Uber and Lyft's existence. So just to give you a little background, Uber started in operation in 2010. They were immediately branded with a cease and desist order from the California Public Utilities Commission, which they ignored and which was never enforced. The CPUC just sat on its hands for 2 years doing nothing. Uber was not even the first company to use this technology. The same technology that Uber uses was already in existence in the taxi industry. Luxor Cab was using an app called, at that time, Taxi Magic. Shortly after, Green Cab started using an app called Cabulous, which is now Flywheel, the most prominent app in the San Francisco taxi industry. So Uber was not there first in this. Where they were there first is their willingness to break the law, and that became their business model, not only in San Francisco and California, but around the world. Place after place after place, they have gone, set up shop, and in violation of local laws, hoping to get the public and eventually the politicians on their side. And they have been very successful at that in many places, unsuccessful in others, but also very hard to stamp out. In 2012, Lyft and Sidecar jumped in, and the wrinkle that they put on this was that they started using completely unlicensed vehicles and drivers. When Uber started, the company itself did not have a permit to operate, but they were working with licensed vehicles, state licensed vehicles that are in the same category as limousines. Lyft and Sidecar, probably seeing what had happened with Uber and that there was no enforcement going on, said, the hell with that, anybody can use their car, and they were also hit with a cease and desist order, and nothing was done, except that the CPUC began a rulemaking proceeding whose results were clear from the start, and 9 months later gave birth to what are now called TNCs, Transportation Network Companies, and made these companies at least provisionally legal. So the legalization of Uber and Lyft was done under very, very unfair conditions to other transportation providers, mainly taxis, but also the limousine industry. In terms of the comparison with taxis, they are subject to much lighter rules on insurance, inspections, driver training, which really doesn't exist, driver background checks, which are minimal. Drivers themselves do not need a permit. There is no permit that is issued to a driver for one of these companies. There is no workers' compensation for drivers. They're treated like independent contractors. They're similar to cab drivers, but San Francisco cab drivers are entitled to workers' compensation. There's no control over the rates that are charged, and this is an issue for the public because it allows these companies to surge price. There's no regulation of the number or type of vehicles that are on the streets, and this presents huge environmental issues. They're not providing wheelchair service. They're violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. And to right this day, there are an estimated 180,000 Uber and Lyft drivers in the state of California, over 37,000 according to the San Francisco City Treasurer working in San Francisco alone, as opposed to we have fewer than 1,900 cabs in San Francisco. So we want to explore the consequences of this for workers, for companies, for the environment, for the society as a whole. Let me start by introducing our panel, and directly to my left is Marcelo Fonseca, who has been a full-time cab driver for 27 years. He is a member of the board of the Yellow Cab Co-op, and this is his second term as a member of that board. Next to him is Barry Korngold, who has driven a cab for over 30 years in San Francisco and on the peninsula. He currently drives for Citywide Cab. He is the former president of the San Francisco Cab Drivers Association, which has merged into San Francisco Taxi Workers Alliance, and he's a co-founder of the Taxi Workers Alliance. He's been very active in Sacramento on legislation and at the CPUC on regulation concerning Uber and Lyft, and he also was a co-chair of the Taxi Advisory Council that was in existence a couple of years ago. So,
The MTA. That's the MTA.
MTA, did I say? Yeah, yeah, under the MTA. And then next to Barry is Tara Hausman, who has driven a cab for over 30 years and is a taxi medallion holder with Flywheel Taxi, which was formerly DeSoto Cab. She also was a member of the Taxi Advisory Council and is a current member of the Taxi Task Force, the MTA's Taxi Task Force, which succeeded the Advisory Council. Next to Tara, we have Doug O'Connor. Doug drives for Luxor Cab. He's a former Uber driver, and he drove for Uber at a time when Uber was using licensed vehicles. He did not drive as UberX now operates with private vehicles. Doug is also the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit, O'Connor versus Uber Technologies, that seeks to obtain employee status for Uber drivers, and Doug will talk more about that in a few moments. And finally, we have Kelly DeSaint, a national cab driver, a former driver for Uber and Lyft, and a regular columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. And before he wrote for the Examiner, he was a blogger who blogged about his experiences in driving for Uber and Lyft. So with that, let's start with Tara. And Tara, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience in driving a cab and what's happened since Uber and Lyft have agreed.
Well, my experience with driving a cab now that Uber and Lyft are happening, each and every cab driver's income has gone way down. There have been some pluses to it, mostly minuses. It's ironic that one of Uber's reasons for success is that they are a de facto universal dispatch. You deal with one number or one app, and you can get a vehicle anywhere in the city, whereas with the cab industry, United Taxi Cab Workers for decades was fighting for a universal dispatch system, and the cab companies fought it. Some of their reasoning was understandable, that it would dilute the brand, the brand that they had developed over decades. I mean, my cab company alone has been around for 85 years. But it has forced a universal dispatch, and people have responded well to that, because just as UTW promised all those years, it does improve service. And so it's been, but if it were just that, that would be fine. And I think that Flywheel is as good an answer as we're going to, the Flywheel app to combat the Uber app is an adequate substitute, but that's improving. But if it were a level playing field, it would be fine. If they carried commercial insurance 24 hours a day, as cabs do, to protect the public, if they were called to meet Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, they have totally ignored, purposely ignored the disabled community that that cab drivers are charged to serve. The congestion that has been wrought because of this is just insane. Adding an extra 37,000 vehicles to the road in San Francisco when we're 7 miles in any direction has made getting around a lot tougher. My income has gone down. If my fellow cab drivers' income has gone down, my medallion income has just plummeted, and but the average cab driver has it even worse. And I'll discuss more later.
Thank you, Tara. And now I'd like to ask Marcelo Fonseca to speak. Marcelo can give a perspective from both a cab driver's point of view and I think a company point of view, owing to his position on the Yellow Cab board. So why don't you go ahead, Marcelo?
Well, as a lot of you know, Yellow Cab filed bankruptcy in January 2016, but there's only so much I can share with you. Some of it has to do with the Uber impact, but I'll speak more on a personal level. Being a cab driver for 27 years, Uber has tremendously had a negative impact. It's never been so demoralizing, so depressing to be a cab driver. I support my mother, who is 87 years old and she's blind. My brother, who is 61 years old, he acquired a tropical disease and he's 50% paralyzed. So to make a living, and I'm a married man, so to make a living and support two other people driving a cab these days is very, very difficult. Another thing that has had a very negative impact on me personally, I immigrated here 32 and a half years ago from Brazil. I am a naturalized citizen. I'm registered to vote. And I mentioned this at one of the hearings in Sacramento with Barry and Mark. We are very active, opposing bills that give Uber and Lyft unfair advantages over the taxi industry. And I mentioned in the Senate committee that when I first listened to the national anthem as a naturalized citizen, I was overwhelmed with emotions. But then, as a career cab driver dealing with the favoritism from lawmakers and every regulatory agency to Uber, I totally lost my faith in the government of this country, and that pride I had went away. It faded away. It has had such a negative impact on me that I have had serious thoughts of not even voting in these upcoming elections. I think most senators and assembly members and appointed officials in our municipal and state regulatory agencies, it is as if they all had a price tag hanging on their necks. And that's my experience with Uber. I never drove for them. I will never drive for Uber. I will continue driving my cab. I'm very proud of knowing this city better than most. When I immigrated here, I was already an adult, and it's late to lose the accent. Sometimes I have passengers in my cab, and they give me a random address. Can you take me to 8 Loxley Avenue? And I go, sure, I know where that is. I'll get you there in 10 minutes. And they look at me like, wow, do you really know where that is? You have an accent. You're not from here. And I go, well, it does not mean I don't know the city. So I'm very proud of knowing this city. I'm very confident that any of you who get into my cab, I can provide you the very best service you can get from a cab driver. But when I see 37,000 of Uber and Lyft picking up anywhere they wish, not having the proper insurance, or not complying with the same rules and regulations I do, it bothers me tremendously. Going back to Yellow Cab, we are trying to reorganize. As you know, Yellow Cab is a co-op. Every member of the co-op is a cab driver. So we are trying the best we can to reorganize and come out of the mess we are in, and hopefully we will.
Thank you, Marcelo. I'd like to go next to Kelly DeSaint, and Kelly has driven for both Uber and Lyft and written an awful lot about it. I'd like to hear your perspective on this, Kelly.
Well, I ended up driving for Lyft originally in February of 2014, just sort of blindly. I didn't even know. Huh?
Speak up.
Oh, sorry. I didn't even really know what it was. I was visiting with a friend, and we were gonna go somewhere, and she goes, "Well, let's just get in this car." And we got in this car with a pink mustache. I'm like, "What's this?" So I was writing a lot about my experiences doing various different jobs and things that I would do in my life, and I thought, wow, this is an interesting phenomenon to document. So I kind of pursued it as sort of just something to do and write about. And as I became more immersed into the culture that exists around it, because that's a big part of it that's sort of not really talked about a lot, but there is a massive culture around Lyft, especially back then. People were very, very loyal to the brand, the drivers were. So as I became sort of immersed in this, I saw this as some sort of brainwashing. It was like people they were lonely, they were desperate for connection, they needed money, or it seemed like that's what they were doing it for. And so I began to make fun of them. and poke jokes at them and call them a cult and how they were drinking Kool-Aid and et cetera, et cetera. And I infuriated them and made them all mad, and Lyft kicked me out of the Facebook group. And I woke up one morning and I had 70-something notifications on my Facebook page, and I was just like, I handed it to my wife, and I was like, you read it, I can't. And she laughed for a good half hour. She says, well, they're not all bad, but, I became, what was referred to in one blog post as the most hated person in Lyft. Shortly thereafter, as Uber started to expand the UberX program, they were offering Lyft drivers $500 to go drive one ride with Uber. So I said, well, I'll go do that and see what that's like. And in the process, I got to go into the Uber processing place where they do the drivers. And it was like going into like the back of a frat house. I mean, it was like insidious in the way they were sort of laughing about things and making fun of the people who were there, especially the foreigners who are having a hard time speaking English. I ended up being the last person in the room, and you could just see this sort of tension that they had dealing with all these foreigners just drop when I was the last one. And you get that sense when you're around like racist or something, I'm a white guy, so now they can talk freely. And so I documented that. And I began to document all my experiences driving Uber, which were entirely negative. There were some positive things. You would have some passengers who were, thoughtful, and you could have conversations with them. And I wouldn't say everybody who uses Uber is a douchebag, even though I did say that the other night. But, they're not all douchebags. But, most douchebags take Uber and Lyft. And so I began to plot my course to taxi, and began talking about it a lot before I did it to really make an impact, because I felt like if I was going to document the corruption within this business model, I couldn't do it as sort of a half-assed way. I had to be really in it. I had to say, I've done this for 10 months. I have a 4.9 rating. I'm not just some schmo just doing this. I actually did it. I drove full-time at a high rating, and I did it for 10 months. And at the end of 10 months, the Uber was going to charge me $200 for a broken phone, and they literally were not going to pay me money that I earned until I paid $200 for a broken phone that wasn't even worth $50, So I just ended that and then switched to taxi. And since then, I've had pretty much the same experience as all the other cab drivers, where it's not been very easy to survive with Uber and Lyft, and seeing how they just blindly go about doing whatever they want to do while we have to follow the rules.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Why don't we go to Doug, and Doug, maybe you can talk a little about your experiences with Uber, and also tell us a little about the lawsuit.
Okay. Well, first I want to say, I think my journey into driving professionally, I started out as a valet in 2008 in the Teamsters Union. Worked at the Clift Hotel, worked downtown at 550 California, and got laid off in 2010 during the recession due to the recession. I got left due to seniority cuts, so I lost my job. Bounced around as a same-day courier for about a year and a half, and during that time when I was a valet, I actually was a taxi school taxi college dropout, and I attended the college over at ABC at Yellow Cab, and was out with another Ethiopian dude taking the class together, and took the class for the first day, and some clown wanted $10. They showed us how the thing worked at Yellow, extorting drivers for money, so we both decided to quit and get out. And we actually wound up becoming Uber Black drivers in about 2012. And we were doing it in 2012 prior to the bride share TNC days. And I wound up actually just working with some guys that were doing UberX and Uber Black with the TCP. So I kind of had seen how it worked in the beginning. I'm probably in the first maybe 100 UberX drivers.
Uber Black being the limos, and
UberX was being a hybrid that had
ordinary cars.
UberX being a hybrid. Originally, it was a hybrid with a TCP license and an airport permit.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, just because people were asking.
Yeah, it was when I was at UberX. It was originally you had to have a hybrid with a TNC license and airport permits and everything. You had to be fully just like an Uber Black driver, but it was just a cheaper rate. So I kind of had seen the first probably 3 or 4 months of, Uber, the integrated platform of UberX, where we were, kind of put in the same platform as, to the public as like a TNC and an UberX with the TCP and an airport permit. So I'd see my income drop about 30 to 40%. Really quickly, I noticed it. I mean, I was making tons of money in February. Like, I was out there a courier and a valet. I mean, I was out driving people. I knew where to go. So I was making like, $2,500 a week gross before a 15% commission. And then, I was still even paying off these Russian guys like $700 a week to rent their car. And I was still coming home with good money every week, It was that good. And then I knew the writing was on the wall once I started doing ride sharing. They called it UberX, on the same platform. So I wound up just kind of like just switching vehicles into an Uber Black for most of the rest for about another 6 or 8 months. And I think the first 2 months, like 2014, I was already kicked out of Uber. I just kind of seen the writing was on the wall once after Sophia Lude got hit by the car. They lowered rates. I kind of knew it was just like the beginning. It was like the start gun for the race to the bottom. Like I already kind of, felt that. But during that time, it was just like I kind of joined like this labor movement among Uber Black drivers who kind of felt, because Uber was telling us we couldn't take cash tips, and because they were setting the prices, because they were criticizing us for accepted rates and things like that, and telling us not to take non-Uber passengers. We feel like, hey, you're our employer, you're our boss. And I joined some other guys. I kind of became like the front man for like a labor lawsuit. I was the lead plaintiff against Uber, just alleging that, hey, if you want to be the boss and do all this stuff, be the boss, man. Give me workers' comp. You want to play the boss, because anything else, if you're not playing the boss, what you're doing is highly illegal. That's the way I felt about it. If you're not the boss, you're doing a lot of stuff that's like being brought up, like in the current Spencer Meyer lawsuit out in New York, the price fixing lawsuit. So that's the way we felt about it. Like, be the boss or shut the fuck up. Uber told us to get lost. We're filing a frivolous lawsuit and stuff, but it's made it for 3 years of litigation. So I think it's a pretty valid lawsuit.
And I think we'll get into some questions later, but why don't we turn it over to Barry Korngold? Go ahead, Barry.
All right, so it's hard to know where to begin here. I've been driving a cab, like Mark said, since I started in '79 on the peninsula. I came here to San Francisco in '87. And when I first came here, I was amazed at the great cab service in San Francisco. We were on radio. I worked for Yellow Cab, which had like a third of all the cabs in the city. On the peninsula, people were waiting like 20 minutes. It wasn't uncommon to wait, 15, 20 minutes for a cab. It was kind of expected, sometimes 45 minutes on a Friday night. I came to the city, everybody got a cab in 5 or 10 minutes, and it was because we were on radio and they would send the closest cab. And I rarely would call in for an order if I wasn't within 5 blocks, unless I was way out in the sunset or something. And then Yellow Cab came out with this computer dispatch, which was supposed to make everything fairer and better. And it was actually anti-dispatch, and it ruined the cab service in San Francisco. They had this for 12 years, and instead of sending the closest cab, they had you check into zones, and then people were out in the Haight, and they'd get a call downtown, and we lost all our downtown business. And the cab industry in San Francisco just went to hell, and everybody was complaining, and a lot of people were saying we need centralized dispatch. Cabulous came out in like 1910 or 1908, 2008 or so, and this was going to be the answer because people could call the cab directly, and it wasn't just Green Cab. Green Cab started it, but other cab drivers were downloading the app on their phone, and this could have been the answer to that because you wouldn't have to go through the dispatch. You could call the closest cab directly, whatever cab company they were working for. But then Uber came out and started putting their app in limousines, which are supposed to be prearranged, and trying to say that they weren't a cab service. They weren't a cab service because they're using an app, or when they went to the CPUC, their argument was that we're not a cab service and so we shouldn't be regulated as taxi cabs. This goes all the way back. I just want to bring up, like in the 1800s when taxi service began, and there were horse-drawn carriages, there was a distinction made between limousine, carriage service where the horse wouldn't even be hooked up to the cart until the time of the ride. And a difference was a cab would be driving on the street and you could hail it, and it was on-demand service. And this started deteriorating when the cell phone came out, and it's deteriorated even more when the app, when the smartphone came out, where people could order instantly, and so it completely erased any distinction between prearranged and on-demand service. So we got two different regulators regulating the same service. They're doing taxi service, but if they don't, the way Uber and Lyft got away with this is saying, well, if they don't call us cabs, then we shouldn't be regulated as them. And actually, the MTA started this they had a cease and desist order on Uber Cab, and they only made them take cab out of their name. So they kind of opened the floodgates by doing that. And so the way it's changed things, as soon as there was a 2-year cease and desist order on Uber that the CPUC had, and then they decided to do a rulemaking proceeding. They made a backroom deal. We know it was a backroom deal because we have copies of the contract that was signed in January 2013, allowing Uber and Lyft to operate on an excess insurance policy, which meant they didn't have to provide coverage unless the driver's personal insurance didn't cover it. Now, this is right as soon as they started the rulemaking proceeding. So the Personal Insurance Federation of California said right away that this isn't ride sharing, this is a commercial livery service being done by personal vehicles, and that's not covered. So in other words, Uber and Lyft were allowed by the CPUC to have a business model that relied on their drivers committing insurance fraud all this time while the rulemaking proceeding is going on. And when this happened, all of a sudden it opened the streets of San Francisco became the Wild Wild West. There was no law and order. It was like anybody could do anything unless you're a taxi cab, in which case you had to follow all these rules. You had to get carry full-time insurance of $1 million. We had our rate set by the city. We couldn't just charge what we want. And that's a consumer protection item, and it also protects the worker because you know that you can at least make a living wage. There's also the issue that to provide taxi service, you have to be driving around making yourself available. So this causes more congestion than a prearranged transportation where you go back to your base until your next call and then you go out. You're not driving around all this time causing traffic or staging in a populated area. So the way it's changed our work day, like my everyday work day when I go to work, which I cannot stand anymore, and a lot of drivers are like this, and now we're looking for something else to do because it's no longer an enjoyable job. It's like we have to follow all these rules, but now we're surrounded by all these cars that don't. They're doing the exact same thing as us. We have apps. That doesn't make them any different. And it's just disrespectful. This is a traditionally dangerous job. We have to pick everybody up, not just people we have their credit card on file. So cab drivers have throughout the years gotten killed doing this job. They've gotten assaulted, and the city has up until recently, made sure that we can at least make a living. Now we can't even do that because we're supposed to compete with people who don't have to play by any rules. So the traffic has gotten, it's unprecedented. GPS developer Tom we used to be the 6th most congested city in 2012. Now we're the 2nd most congested city. The Bay Area used to be not even listed on the American Lung Association's 25 most polluted areas. Now we're number 6 in like 3 years. The traffic speeds have there was a study from 2007 to 2015 by the San Francisco Transportation Authority, and it showed that up until 2013, the traffic speeds pretty much remained the same. Sometimes they even got quicker. soon as they unleash these, Uber and Lyft vehicles, now all of a sudden from 2013 to 2015, this average traffic speed went down 18%. And so this is the kind of, we have to deal with this all the time now. We're dealing with more traffic, we're dealing with these drivers who aren't used to driving in the city, they're coming from all over California, they have no respect for laws, there's a culture in Uber of breaking the law, that's how they came about. So we don't know when these cars are gonna be making funny moves, so not only are we dealing with unprecedented traffic, these drivers are driving crazy. So, it's just, any kind of worker protection, we have to make deals with people now about what we charge. One of the advantages of having a set rate is you don't get in these arguments or negotiations every time you're gonna take a cab. And that goes for the passenger and the cab driver. There's a set rate that everybody does. So, it's been very unfair to, the industry, to the, this occupation, and, that's all I'll say for now. We can open up a discussion.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions of the panel, and anybody who wants to, feels they want to jump in on it, please do, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. But, if you listen to what Uber and Lyft are saying, they will tell you that they are providing opportunities for workers, that these are jobs that people can do sometimes in their spare time, or if they want in their full time, and that this is a great thing. It's good for them, it's good for the economy, and I'm just wondering if anybody on the panel has any thoughts on that, and also, given a wider perspective, how this kind of work that is not only Uber and Lyft, it's all kinds of companies in what's called the gig economy, how that is affecting, workers, the city, the society as a whole. Does anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, I monitor fairly regularly the Facebook groups for Uber and Lyft drivers. And I have for over 2.5 years now. So I see what they say. I mean, they don't know I'm there. I just lurk and read what they say. And I'm always taking screen grabs of high payouts, to analyze them, to see how they're making money. Uber and Lyft drivers do not make money unless they work guarantees. What Uber and Lyft does is they offer their drivers guaranteed hourly rates of $40 to $45 to $50 an hour if they go out on the streets. Taxi drivers can always tell when this is going on because there's no reason for there to be that many Uber and Lyfts out on a normal weekend. Like 2 weekends ago, they were just everywhere because they were doing a guarantee. So if you work between like 7 p.m. and 2 a.m., you're gonna get $45 guaranteed. All you have to do is accept 2 rides an hour. So what the Uber and Lyft drivers do is they accept the 2 rides and they go and they hide out. They just stay within San Francisco. They turn down any rides outside of the city because those don't count. So they're turning down rides. I mean, I'm hearing people, they're turning down rides from San Francisco to like Hayward. They're going, nope, won't do it. Because it'll take them too long to get back in the city and they're gonna lose their guarantee. And the fact is, they're not gonna make enough money from that ride to make more than $45. That's how little they're making. So drivers only drive when there's these guarantees and when they know they're gonna make the most amount of money, when they're gonna get the surge pricing and this. So the idea that people are doing this part-time or that they're doing it because they're gonna make money they're only making money because Uber has $60 billion to throw at them. For what? To fill the streets with cars. I mean, so that's why they do it. You'd be stupid not to take $45 an hour if you're an Uber driver trying to make some extra money for whatever reason, But a lot of these people do have regular jobs, and they're just doing it on the side. But what I'm also seeing is people who are working 60 hours a week, accepting 130 rides, and they're making $15,000 to $2,000 a week after Uber's take. So that's a lot of hours that they're having to work to fill in those guarantees. So that's what I'm seeing with the Uber drivers and what they're doing.
I'd like to add a little bit from the cab driver's perspective to what Kelly just said. What I meant before by my trust in the government being totally undermined, When you go to those meetings in Sacramento, a lot of assembly members and senators, they are very proud. They like the idea of Uber and Lyft creating employment. But what they fail to understand is, Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, but before Uber became very popular, I think San Francisco had about 9,000 registered taxi drivers. So how can a lawmaker representing all of us sit in a Senate committee or in an assembly committee and praise the employment opportunities from Uber and Lyft at the same time 5,000 San Francisco cab drivers are going unemployed? I never understood that, and that totally undermines that trust that I had in lawmakers and the appointed officials in our municipal and state regulatory agencies. I totally lost my trust in them.
My theory on that actually is that there's a lot of animosity towards taxi drivers in the city. And I noticed that when I first started driving Lyft, was people were talking very poorly of taxi drivers and not being able to get rides and just general things, especially foreign cab drivers. They would always say that the cab drivers are bad in San Francisco. And you see that a lot to this day. They will say cab drivers are the worst in San Francisco. And they're this and they're that. And then one of the first things I noticed from driving a cab was I never realized there was that much animosity towards cab drivers, and I immediately felt it. I immediately felt that animosity towards me. So what I think a lot of what people say when Uber's doing this and Uber's doing that is they're not thinking about the consequences of the cab drivers because they don't care about the cab drivers. They really don't care. They see cab drivers as scumbags and just like, screw them, let them die. I've seen people say in multiple times, in response to things that I've posted and things I've written, the San Francisco taxi industry cannot die soon enough.
I'd like to speak to that. It's really true that it's almost like a racism against cab drivers. It's not, of course, it's not race because there's all different races drive cabs, but there's a prejudice against somebody in a cab. I've even known people who won't drive a cab because of the way their image. They don't want to sully their image. This is a misconception that's been promoted by Uber and Lyft. By when they came out, they're talking bad about cab drivers. They're trying to say, oh, you can get a real person just like you if you call Lyft. Peer-to-peer. Yeah, peer-to-peer, you know. What the misconception is a lot of these Uber and Lyft drivers are the same drivers. They're drivers who got fired from cab companies. Yeah. You know, and they're going to be they're doing the same thing. They're picking and choosing their calls just like cab drivers are. And I'm not saying there aren't problems in the cab industry. There's a lot of problems, and the cab industry really needed to fix a lot of problems. But the answer isn't throwing it out and then just starting another cab company that's even bigger and worse, you know, and having anonymous, you know, there's all these rules that have been come up over the years, over the decades for cabs to get rid of some of these bad behaviors that occur from this occupation, such as identifiable cabs, getting fingerprint background checks, having set rates. It's all to protect the consumer as well as the driver, but these things came out of bad behaviors that cab drivers have done. Now this bad behavior is still going on, you just don't see it because the Uber drivers and the Lyft drivers can turn down fares and you never know it because they'll say, oh no, I'm not gonna go pick up in that part of town because they're not doing surge pricing. Or like Kelly just said, they're gonna do their two calls an hour and then pull over and not take any more.
If they don't accept the ride. Like,
Yeah.
the ride comes in, they have to accept it, but what they could do on the other side is cancel it, just like a flywheel.
Yeah.
So they accept the ride and then they cancel it. That's how they do to get around the system.
Yeah.
Uber can't hold them because of the workers, the employer status. They can't punish them for canceling rides because they could create a myriad of reasons why they had to cancel that ride. But they have to accept the rides.
Right,
They
and
can
then,
cancel.
and as far as like bad cab driving, everybody's got their complaints about this cab that cut them off or whatever. Well, we're all easily identifiable. These cars do it, and most people don't realize they're an Uber or Lyft car. They just think they're just somebody who is driving poorly. If they were all painted, you know, with polka dots, everybody would know, oh, the damn, you know, Uber driver, the damn TNC driver, but most people can't identify them. They don't know it. They're stealth.
So I'd like to ask Doug to just fill us in on the current status of the lawsuit, and then also pose the question, what are the legal possibilities of Uber and Lyft drivers becoming employees, if not through this lawsuit, then, through some other means?
Well, it's just kind of like currently, I kind of feel like, the fortunate part is there's a lot of people, Uber had proposed a really just egregious, sham settlement for the drivers in April, and a number of drivers and other lawyers had actually objected to the proposed settlement because the settlement was just basically like a sweetheart deal for the class action lawyer, Shannon from Boston, who had actually planted her own cronies inside the lawsuit to get it started. It was basically a cover-up because she had not say litigated for overtime, you know what I mean? But then she wanted to settle everyone's overtime that she had never even assessed the damage for. She wanted to settle overtime claims that were never litigated on her, what she did herself. She wanted to actually, settle the workers' comp claim in state superior court for a claim she never litigated, you know what I mean? So there were a lot of us who said you know what, this is not what we had in mind. So the judge looks so far, Judge Chen has asked for a lot of information. It looks so far he hasn't approved this settlement. I don't know what's gonna happen. But as far as I think what's gonna happen here is, at least with the Lyft settlement, it looks like that settlement, proposed settlement, which was approved, was, it kind of remained interesting because they actually retained independent contractor status for the Lyft drivers, which actually means a lot of the same principles in the Uber price fixing lawsuit out in New York. I don't know if you're aware of that lawsuit, the Spencer Meyer versus Uber, Travis Kalanick lawsuit. A lot of those principles would apply with 1099 status for these Uber and Lyft drivers. So all these people that think they're having fun and games, getting a 40-hour guarantee as a 1099 contractor, well, instead of being a 1099K, independent contractor, you now get to become a 1099K independent co-conspirator because Uber and Lyft regard you as an independent online merchant that sets his or her own prices, and you're agreeing to the prices that they raise and lower. So all it makes you is a price fixer. I look at, sometimes I drive down the street, I'm like, damn, that guy in the Audi with the Lyft sticker, he's gonna make a mighty nice Leaf defendant one day. I'm gonna take his wages and his house stuff, through a civil lawsuit. It's gonna be a lot of fun. These guys don't know what they're getting into.
So now you're talking about a separate lawsuit that's been filed in New York.
Yeah.
That seeks, it's basically an antitrust law.
An antitrust law, the answer, see, if they don't want to be the employer, then these guys, Uber and Lyft, cannot set the prices for these drivers. So either way, they're basically fucked. And so if the drivers don't understand, okay, Lyft and Uber, they can go out of business as a corporation and fold, you know what I mean? But when you look at the meat on the bone, so I see the guy who's an Uber or Lyft driver and he has a firefighter sticker on his bumper plate, he's got a nice little job and stuff, and I think, he'd make a 99 Relief defendant one day. And I think some of these drivers don't really understand as a co-conspirator the concept of disgorgement and relief defendant. I'm planning on educating on some of them maybe one day if it goes to that for Lyft drivers. So far, they're independent contractors and the courts approve it, great.
Any other thoughts?
I'd like to thank you for being the lead plaintiff in this lawsuit. And not only that, I'd like to thank you for resisting settling it. Because this lawsuit is not just about Uber drivers, it's about the whole independent contractor concept. And that's why Silicon Valley is so scared shitless about this lawsuit. And it goes beyond the transit industry. It's the entire gig economy and what constitutes a worker and what constitutes an employee. And when I first heard that there was a settlement, and when I read what it was, my heart absolutely broke. And then I heard that, well, the judge has not yet approved it. And I'm really glad to hear that you're objecting to it being settled, because it's...
Well, because they basically wanted to basically make me an independent contractor, even though they acted like an employer. And basically, it's just kind of like, well, okay, so you guys are going to give me like $2 and put the gun in my hand and say I did it, right? Because you know,
hopes
that's
and
basically
dreams.
legally. I mean, you have to look at it as like, well, if Uber's not an employer that employs drivers, well, basically, yeah, you're an independent co-conspirator at this point.
And the hopes and dreams of millions of workers are hanging on this. And thank you very much for hanging tough with this. And that must be very difficult when you've got a very high-powered lawyer who was going to be God's gift to the worker.
Well, she claimed she was going to be God's gift. To the
Well,
worker.
yeah, well, she was the best thing to come along so far.
Well, she claimed
for
she was
that.
the best thing to come along.
And, well, okay, she's got good PR, but I'm glad
Well,
that the
because,
lawsuit
yeah, I mean,
started.
that's all she is, though. I mean, you have to realize, like, in the game, all she is like this, like, sellout sucker who just became their patsy. You know, people don't know, right? If you look, okay, if you do a lot of research on Shannon Liss-Riordan, there was another co-defendant, a co-plaintiff, right, named Thomas Colopy, who filed the lawsuit with me, right? Thomas Colopy's brother, James Hannon Colopy, went to law school with Shannon Liss-Riordan. And she somehow, after Shannon Liss-Riordan came out to San Francisco and found out about Uber through her cousin who lives in St. Francis Woods, all of a sudden, Tom Colopy, Tom Colopy admitted he met Shannon Liss-Riordan as a kid, you know, at his brother's Harvard graduation. You know, it kind of seemed like something was going on between those two, right? He met him and, like, you know, he met her and always had like this childhood impression, like Shannon being this hero and stuff, you know. But basically what you look at it is you follow the timeline in her media stories where she found out about Uber in 2010, 2011. Tom just happened to work for Uber in 2012 as an Uber black driver and just happened
Isn't
to
this
start
good schmutz?
and just happened. And he just happened to become the guy who like recruited everybody to become lead plaintiffs online. You know, he would go in through Facebook and troll Facebook. Yeah, Tom Colopy, yeah. That Tom Colopy, yeah. He would go through there and he recruited me to become the lead plaintiff, right? So the whole game was, yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, Shannon Liss-Riordan's I feel in my opinion, she's actually kind of like a fraud. And she's actually, if you don't know this, if you study like Levittman versus Uber in like Massachusetts, a lawsuit that got filed in 2012, she already settled the case with Uber. She's already done business before this lawsuit. Man, nobody talks about it, but
I think
she's
it's
already on
safe
the
to
take.
say that this lawsuit is somewhat of a shambles at this point. A lot of
Yeah,
distrust.
that's what I kind of feel about it. Yeah, I mean, basically,
But thank you for hanging tough anyway.
but yeah, I mean, Liss-Riordan's gonna have her day though. She's gonna have her day.
At this point, I'd like to go to questions from the audience. If you have questions for any particular panelist or the panel as a whole, why don't you raise your hand and we'll call on you. Steve?
Yeah, well, I think the issue of deregulation is part of, an important part of what this idea is, that the ideology of the owners of Uber, these technology companies, is to disrupt the economy. We don't need any regulation. We'll use this new technology to put everybody on the technology and forget the regulation. And they're colluding with the politicians to do this because you've said that they clearly ignore the laws, the rules. Okay, so basically there's collusion, so you have corruption of the politicians. And I think it's dangerous for people when you have people driving 60, 70 hours a week. Truck drivers is illegal. It seems like there's no limit for a Uber driver. I mean, they can drive as long as they want. So
No, there's been guys, I've heard cases of rumors, I mean, just from like being in the limo industry and the taxi industry. I mean, I've been a corporate limo driver for 2 years, the past 2 years, and a taxi driver doing both. And I hear the stories, you know, just about, you know, a lot of like some of the Filipino chauffeurs I know. They're like, yeah, my friend drove Uber, and he'd like stay at his house and do it 20 hours a day until he fell asleep on the road and got in a road accident on the highway. I mean, they happen all the time, so it's just like definitely a valid.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things is there's a recall petition for Lee. Lee is in charge of his commissions in San Francisco.
Are you talking about Ed Lee, the mayor?
Yeah, Ed Lee, the mayor. He's in charge of these commissions.
Yeah.
So if your union said, well, we're going to support the recall, and here's the reasons why, and you list all the reasons, then his commission is failing to enforce the law. His commission is putting the residents in jeopardy. His commission is allowing people to work all these hours without any control. His commission is causing people to get in accidents, and then who's responsible? They're allowing the insurance companies So if you had a list of all the reasons and supported the repeal on that basis of that and said we need commissioners who are going to enforce the law, that would be a way of, at least for the public, saying, here are reasons why this union or this group of workers are saying you have to take responsibility and accountability. That's one thing. I mean, on a statewide and national level, these companies, well, in France, they put them in jail, these Uber executives. And we have to ask, why aren't they doing the same thing here? If you or I individually said, screw the laws,
Okay.
screw the rules.
Yeah,
we're
Goldman
just gonna do
Sachs,
whatever we want,"
Goldman Sachs,
we would be grabbed and we'd be put in jail.
Goldman
They
Sachs.
have a pass, you know, because they're a big company with billions of dollars, and they convoy these people, they pay off the politicians. So I think we have to make that issue a concrete issue for people and show that, in fact, it's harming the public, it's not just harming the drivers, it's harming the
Well,
public.
no, exactly. I think that's a valid point.
Let's get some reaction from the panel and.
The panel, yeah, I
And some
mean,
more questions?
Just about everybody wants to speak. We'll start with
Well,
Marcelo.
I just want to add to what Steve said, members in the audience, every taxi cab in San Francisco to be legal on the road, the license for the cab is the medallion. And Steve brought up Mayor Lee. In 2013, in his State of the City address, at the same time, Mayor Lee sells a medallion for $250,000. In his State of the City address, he praised Uber and Lyft, and he proclaimed July 13, Lyft Day. How can our mayor take $250,000 for young cab drivers?
Didn't like Senator Leland Yee agree to make a proclamation with an undercover FBI agent for $20,000? Like if you read the transcripts for that case?
I don't know about that one, but
You look it up, but I mean, I think it's the same thing, right?
But Mayor Lee, his State of the City address in 2013, anybody can look it up. It's there, it's public, it's documented, and it blows my mind how, because the San Francisco taxi industry is a city asset, how can our mayor charge $250,000 per permit at the same time he praises, promotes, and facilitates unfair competition? I just wanted to add that to your recall reference.
Okay, and Barry, do you have any?
Yeah, just really quick, I wanted to clarify that the mayor appoints the SFMTA board, but the governor appoints the CPUC, which are the ones who allowed all this to go on. And what I've been becoming aware of, to my dismay, is that even the state legislatures are now making laws instead of to protect the public, safety, et cetera, and consumer protection, they're making laws to protect these billion-dollar corporations' business model. The laws, they ignore facts. They ignore the fact that they're doing commercial work, and they're still calling them personal vehicles. Even if they're rented for a few hours a day, the legislature is going along with this. So they're making all these laws to protect Uber and Lyft's business model. They don't want to make them have background checks. They don't want their vehicles to be inspected. It's almost making me throw up my hands, although I don't advocate not voting in this election.
Vote, please
Yeah.
vote. What you were asking about, how Uber and Lyft are touting job opportunities, and the job opportunities that they are taking away from working cab drivers are just astounding. We have guys who are not only supporting a family, some of them are supporting an entire village back home, and it's become impossible to make a living. I am extraordinarily fortunate that I have a husband who also works, and I get health insurance through. And this whole independent contractor thing, which was already in the cab industry and was already a cancer, it's been made that much worse. When Kelly was talking about how a couple of weekends ago they flooded the streets, let me tell you, that Friday night, I was driving from 4:30 p.m. till I finally gave up at 12:30 p.m. And I walked out of my cab company with $45 and a moving violation. Because and it's the first mover I've dealt with in more than a decade, and it was because I was desperate and making stupid moves.
I worked all the way from 4:30 to 4:30, made 100. So you didn't miss much by cutting that around.
And this was on the Friday of the 4th of July weekend. This is a booming weekend. So what it's doing to people who they are the sole support for their family or the sole support for their village is just, it's criminal. Well, it's awful.
Yeah, no, I'd just say, like, I mean, just like one thing on the, you know, the whole like thing. I mean, I think one of the most important things to realize is, I mean, when you really study, you know, the effects. I mean, I think one of the things people should do is actually correlate, you know, as you know, Uber, like TNC driver rates have gone down, income's like lowered to the public. How many people get raped? How many passengers die under the care of an Uber or Lyft driver? You know, how many times? It just seems like every time someone's getting like in accidents where passengers die, it's because the driver is driving to get the passenger out of the vehicle too quickly. I mean, even the case in Southern California last year where the passenger had gotten dropped off at the wrong hotel, the AIG executive got dropped off at the wrong Marriott in Palm Desert, and he drowned in the swimming pool from an Uber driver. And then the other story, a wrongful death lawsuit of a young white man who got kicked out of his Uber cab in Long Beach in the hood and wandered into the wrong house while he was drunk at 2:30 in the morning and got shot and killed. And that's all like different. There's been 2 incidents too where, you know, 2 Uber passengers have died because the Uber driver drove out of a parking lot and got hit by an oncoming car. And that's all drivers.
There's another rape.
Either there's an assault or, you know, a rape, assault, or a death, a passenger death. I mean, I can tell you, like, you know what, if you do a study on like low income and crime and like rape and stuff, there's a correlation between lower income and crime and rape and things like that, which correlate. We can translate right now into the ride-sharing industry. Back when I did it, you know, when there were higher rates in professional drivers, this was never a problem.
And yet Uber is spending millions to fight the idea of fingerprint and live scan background checks.
But another
It's
important
amazing to me.
aspect that's being overlooked here is the public. The public love Uber. And I made, it's a bad joke, but I made the joke is like, you know, how do you explain Uber's popularity? You know, it's like you read a headline, Uber driver kills 6-year-old girl on New Year's Eve. The public response is, what's Uber? They don't care. People jump out of airplanes. People do stupid things all the time. They're still going to take Uber. The people want Uber. And that's why the governments are acting that way. And another example is like, you know, 1015 Folsom, how they're kicking the cabs out, or the Masonic where they kick the cabs out, and all these places where they're chasing the cabs away because the bouncers don't want us there. So because they need the Ubers and Lyfts to come in because they know 90% of the people in those clubs are taking Ubers and Lyfts. They're not taking cabs. It's like the public is like, that's what I see. I mean, I see the public just not wanting us anymore. And then they get in a cab and you drop them off and they don't pay and it's like, oh, I forgot, I thought I was an Uber. You know, that happens to me all night long. It never stops, you know? It's like that's, you know, the public, they're just, they love the cheap prices. Yes. What else would they like about it?
To prove my point, remember New Year's Eve 2022, $5 or $10, right?
Yeah,
Those guys were not making money.
I know.
I don't believe it. If they drop the prices just like us, people come back to us.
Of course they will.
I talk to people, they're like look, 2 guys told me last week, from Berkeley to San Francisco, Uber to $8.75. And as soon as they saw me, they told me, they said, Uber had the service. Of course, there are people that don't like us, but a lot of people look at
It is the price, though. No, I completely agree with you. It's the price. It's not because they don't like us. They're making that decision based on economics alone.
Exactly.
It's cheaper.
Well, that's what they've done now because their drivers are so bad. Their drivers are such low-quality drivers that they've only resorted to capturing everybody by price, being the cheapest ride out there. I had no doubt. Like, you know what? Like on New Year's Eve, I went out there. I mean, I'm not trying to like be arrogant or anything like that, but with my experience as a valet and things like that, I have a really big leg up on every taxi driver in the whole fleet in San Francisco. You know, I actually went out there. I took home like $450 on New Year's Eve. You know, I went out there and like
Last New Year's Eve.
No, this 2016 New Year's Eve, I went out there, made $4.50, and the thing is, like, when Uber charges us the same price, I'll go out and pillage fucking Uber and Lyft drivers all day. And the only thing is right now, you know, is like they're charging such a low price. You know what I mean? That's like the only time that I get slow is like if their price rates are so low, you know, that might pose a little bit difficult to me, but I can guarantee you if they ever had to employ the drivers or they lost their price control to set such low rates, I would go out there and I would make twice as much as I would on a shift right now.
And all the Uber and Lyft drivers want the prices to go up.
Yeah, it's
The
just
Uber
the
and Lyft
problem
drivers
is,
are
like I said, the
complaining
big problem
bitterly
is
about
just
the
the
prices.
price. You know, I mean, if they don't want to be the employer, I think at some point, hey, if these guys don't want to be the employer, great. Then I think we should go as taxi drivers, just go to court and just tell them like, well, fuck you. You know what? You can't set the price anymore. And we would get that injunction like that.
Well, if there's a ballot measure.
Let's
No.
go to other questions.
Get an injunction, man.
Let's go over here and then we'll go over there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about how the Uber drivers are being exploited. One thing I learned about was the way they get their brand new Prius was through something that was called Breeze that was taken over by Uber, and it's like sharecropping where they're.
Well, Breeze just went out of business a couple days ago, so.
Breeze went out of business, but Uber took it over, I understood. They bought
Uber had their own leasing program. Uber and Lyft both have their own
Somebody
leasing.
want to explain what Breeze is?
Okay, let me go back.
Uber drivers are responsible for paying back their car loan. How are they making money? How does it come out?
Does somebody want to explain how Uber works? Let me just say that in theory, people are supposed to be using a car that they own to provide these services. One of the ways that Uber is thumbing their nose at the entire world is that there are all kinds of deals out there right now where you don't have to own your own car and you can still drive for these companies. Somebody want to explain that a little more?
Well,
Okay.
Breeze was a company that rented cars to people who didn't have cars. I mean, the Uber and Lyft's whole selling point in the beginning was, oh, we're taking cars off of the road, we're filling empty seats. Now, they're providing cars for people who don't have cars or who otherwise would maybe be taking the bus or the train. Now they're giving them deals on cars or renting them cars. And that's,
The president
yeah.
of Lyft said once that, like, there's a huge percentage, like 60% of the applicants for Lyft don't qualify because their cars are either too old or they don't have a car. So, and the way they think, it's literal doublespeak, where they're saying that we're taking cars off the road, but we have all these people who want to drive for us, but they don't have a car. So let's give them a car.
At a usurious rate.
Oh yeah, at a high, it's a horrible lease. And what they do is how they pay that lease off is that when you make your money for Uber or Lyft, they take the money to pay the car off first. So you get what's left. So you're paying Lyft the 28 or 30, 25 to 30% of your wage of what you've earned. The rest of it goes towards your car, and then you get whatever's left.
And if you quit the company, then
And-
the interest rate that was already high on your vehicle goes up. It's in the
Well-
original contract you sign to
When
get the car.
you lease to own, yeah.
Yeah.
But when you do the, like, Breeze and Uber and Lyft both have similar programs. When you have 2 weeks to notify them to return the car. When you return the car, they go through like enterprise. They go through, it's like, that wasn't there before, that wasn't there before. And they hit you with every little thing they can. It's thousands of dollars to get out of it. So it is like it's indentured servitude because you're having to pay your way out of it at the end. I mean, it's the exploitation is exactly what I documented from the beginning. I was sitting there saying, this is exploitation, this is bad, this is not good, this is a horrible thing that's happening. And everybody was like, you're stupid, except the cab drivers, They're the only ones that, agreed with me. But I was trying to tell all the other Uber Lyft drivers that they were being exploited, that this is not good, but.
So Marcelo had a further response, and then we'll go over
Yeah, related to your question, Mark and I, we were the Energy Committee in the Senate to oppose Assembly Bill 2763. That bill will be at the Appropriations Committee very soon.
No, it's going to the full floor.
Oh, so it already went through the Appropriations Committee, I guess.
No, it didn't go to the Appropriations Committee.
Oh, I thought it had to. But anyway, it's going to go to the full floor in the Senate. And this bill is redefining the meaning of a personal vehicle because we never agreed that Uber and Lyft are ride sharing because when they take you from point A to point B for compensation, it's a taxi service with or without an app. Anyway, this bill is to define a leased vehicle as a personal vehicle. So those drivers, as Kelly said, drivers without a car can lease that vehicle and drive for Uber and Lyft. And they are stuck with either buying the car or leasing that car. And a lot of times they cannot afford it.
Like, one of the questions that concerns me though, like if they're driving, if you're renting a vehicle that they don't own, you know what I mean, that's not theirs, or their spouse, or their wife's, why don't they have the workers' comp, like at the airport, right? If you look at the TCP holder permit requirement at the airport, right? They say if you're part of a TCP or charter part of a carrier, you can't drive a vehicle that you don't own unless you're a spouse or an officer of the company, right? Otherwise, any other activity other than that requires workers' comp. So, I mean, I see with the renting thing, I feel at SFO, if these people are, renting a vehicle and they're not like an officer of Uber or Lyft, well, then they should have workers' comp. They're not a spouse or a domestic partner or something like that. They don't meet those exemptions. They're not a partnership with these companies, and they need to, like a true partnership, not just the whole partner. I mean, because Starbucks has employees that they call partners too, right? So partners, associates, whatever they call them. So I think definitely there's the issues brought up. I mean, there's a lot of inequality going on right now, for sure.
Okay, so let's go over here. Dave, you have a question?
I'm going to toss out one thing too. My name is Dave. A long time ago, I helped co-found UTW with Julian and Richard Knowles, and by background also, I was a lawyer, and every job I've done, I've had my eyes wide open. You don't want to experience this body in what I'm experiencing, except on the positive side, I did have Robert Williams in the cab. Yeah, and I took Rose Besnick to the Lighthouse for the Blind. She was a regular.
Dave, what's your question?
And here's the question. I'm sorry, I was just giving some info by way of identification. So there may be another alternative. How would you guys feel about this in San Francisco? It's supposed to be on the cutting edge of progressivism. How about if the entire cab industry were municipalized, the cab companies paid off, the medallion holders paid off, put this thing on the ballot, the cabs would then become part of Muni, as much as I hate Muni, and all the drivers would be paid living wages and benefits and would be employees, and there would be no more independent contractor scam. What do you think about that?
It's a great idea. A little off the subject. If anybody wants to, answer briefly, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like, I think that's, I think right now that's definitely food for thought, given the fact that, one thing I found really disturbing about the MTA is how they do kind of become a quasi-employer, because I feel like the cab companies have always allowed me to be a true independent contractor, but it's really the city that actually acts like the boss.
We're being drug tested.
The city drug tests me. They tell me when when I become a cab driver, they tell me I have to be at the Thursday meeting from all day to take the test and receive training approved by city employees like a police officer, and I have to go disability training, things like that. And, I kind of feel like the city really is, if anybody, the city would be my employee. I mean, I should be a municipal employee, because they're regulating, they're like an employer, they're the employer more than the cab, because the cab companies, and I think what happens, I think the city really should pay for all the gates and gas that I've paid for this whole time, because, the city just the city's really the employer. That's what I feel, yeah.
One of the problems with the independent contractor system is that the cab companies, or in this case Uber and Lyft, have taken a hands-off attitude to preserve that independent contractor status. And therefore, the city ends up acting en loco employer. So many of the regulations that we have to follow wouldn't be there if the city didn't feel it had to backfill and make sure that conduct was regulated, the conduct that should be regulated by one's employer. And so it's a tremendous pain in the tush that there's such a web of regulations, and it's damn sad because a lot of those regulations are because the cab industry and other industries have decided to take the approach of independent contractors when we really are not and never were.
Yes, over here?
So I apologize if this was mentioned, I came in a little bit late, but I have a question that's a little bit regulation, organizing, and market question. So we've been talking about obviously Uber and Lyft are the unregulated part, right? And cities like, it makes sense that cities like San Francisco and New York, where there's the kind of market for rides, that there's the Taxi Workers Alliance and, you know, folks are concentrated here. My question is, does that, how can we regulate and does that work in smaller cities like the East Bay in Oakland, where Uber is now going to move their headquarters? Do drivers identify, you know, in some of those smaller cities? How might it work to be able to organize those folks? Is it that they start from Oakland and, you know, we need a regulation system similar to the Oakland taxi, you know, regulation? How would it work in some of these smaller cities where I know I've seen more and more Ubers and cars on road?
Barry?
Yeah, well, California has had a law for a long time that says taxi service is supposed to be regulated by cities and counties. And I totally agree with that, and I think every city and county is different. And taxi service is a local thing. It's, you know, it affects different cities differently. And frankly, I wouldn't have a problem with Uber and Lyft if they would just follow the same rules, if they had to follow the rules for taxi service. And some cities don't care either. They don't even have, you know, I called Redwood City one time to find out what it takes to get a taxi license there, and I said, oh, you just need to get a business license. They didn't even know about weights and measures, which, you know, calibrates the meters. So not every city cares that much, but when you're talking about big cities like San Francisco or urban areas, it's more important to have a more closely regulated taxi industry. But I wouldn't have a problem if they just said, okay, cities regulate taxi service. The problem is the CPUC claimed jurisdiction over taxi service, saying that it's prearranged, which is ridiculous. The only thing that's prearranged is your payment method. You prearrange that because you register
Well,
your credit
that's definitely
card.
true, because, you know, I was, you know, looking one time, you know, I guess right now, like, one of my big concerns about Lyft, if you go to, like, the Google Play Store, where they ask you, like, if you need a ride, I've been noticing, like, you know, for a while, Lyft has been actually putting taxi or taxi app as its description in the ride, you need a ride section.
For a while there.
For a while, they've been having it like taxi or taxi app.
And bus too.
You know, taxi or taxi app is, right now, the current metadata on Lyft is actually taxi off, like the last time I looked at it, it said taxi. So I kind of wonder why the CPUC is regulating something that claims to be a taxi company. I mean, that's just something like a question I wonder about.
Mark?
Go ahead.
Or, you know, just, I mean, having like an Ed Lee Pinata party with like the general public and stuff, you know, I'm thinking about throwing that in the Mission, maybe later this summer after Outside Lands. We could have like a pinata party, invite like the whole Mission. It's like, and you know, the raffle would be just who gets to play with the pinata first. I think that'd be kind of cool, you know, I think that'd be like a good way to build community and things like that, because, I mean,
Some people who will participate in that would take people who were in.
well, no, I mean, there's a lot of people,
Exactly.
Hey, this
Okay, hold on, we have people
I
waiting
mean, if
to
you want to
talk.
like recall, Ed Lee, I mean, you just got to like really, I mean, focus more. I mean, like I went to the tech tax protest during the week in front of, in front of Twitter and Uber, and I think the really problem is like, I mean, it's just like people just have to realize, like, you know what, come out there and just realize. I mean, the bigger problem is like Airbnb, in my opinion, because why do people have to take cheaper transportation? Because they got more expensive housing now. That's what's like an Airbnb tax. There's like, 2013, there was less people out after 11 o'clock down the weekdays because they don't have disposable income anymore because of the high housing cost.
One of the insidious aspects of Uber's huge lobbying arm, not just in San Francisco in the state, but across the country and in other countries, is not just that they can contribute money to campaigns, but they showed early on with Susan Bonilla that if you don't play their game, they will spend no end of money to defeat you, to smear you, to elect the other person, to stifle your opportunity to reach higher office. And they put a seriously good scare into legislators that way. You know, it's just fine and dandy if they receive Uber money, but the thing I think that scares the crap out of them is being in the crosshairs of Uber if they don't do what Uber says, and that's something we do not have the resources to fight against.
We totally have to, oh my God, dude.
San Francisco. The entire board is appointed by one person, the mayor. Which means that if the mayor wants to have something happen, that's what's going to happen. And early on in the tech boom, we had Mayor Lee, and as we all know, he is very tech happy. And he was basically not going to do anything that discouraged Uber and Lyft from happening. And at that point, the MTA could have actually stepped in and tried to do some regulations, but one way or the other, the mayor discouraged that from happening. So to speak directly to your point, the MTA needs to be appointed by more than one person. Possibly there needs to be a larger board so that each supervisor gets to nominate one person. I know it's very attractive to think about electing somebody citywide, but the problem with that is that seat then is going to be elected by Uber because they're going to be the only ones with the money to do the advertising blanket-wide across the city. So if each supervisor got to appoint one person on the MTA board, that would make the MTA somewhat more responsive to the needs of San Franciscans. And I think that in the beginning, if we had gotten them on the page to do some regulation of Uber, maybe the whole world would be different.
Excellent point. That's not the only commission that the mayor appoints.
Certainly isn't.
Park and Rec, for instance.
Certainly
There
isn't.
are others. It's stacked.
And years ago, the Board of Supervisors put something on the ballot that had several of the commissions duly appointed. The mayor got the majority of the seats in every single case, but at least the Board of Supervisors got some.
I've already filed a claim against the airport too, by the way. I've just been testing the waters with a few taxi drivers, and this, I actually allege because to file a lawsuit against the city, you got to file a claim against the city. And
then
I
they
said
reject
because
it.
then you have 6 months to file a claim, right? So you can file the claim for free, right? So as long as you file the claim within 6 months, you can sue within a year. So what I had alleged was that like after in February when they are now allowed, when they renewed the permit as it is, because Uber and Lyft have a 28-month permit on their cars, right? They don't have to renew their permit for like until June of 2018. And I said because you know what? Because they're allowed to self-produce their own. Because the taxi, we have to do our inspections. We have to put it has to be installed by the city, inspected, the stickers and everything, transponders, GPS fixed in the vehicle, insurance. I felt that they were violating my rights too, and they were actually reducing my income because if I do go to the airport, I'm waiting longer because of these cars, right? Well, a few taxi drivers and I, we've been testing the waters just to like start, kind of like rattling the saber, and we were waiting for the Flywheel lawsuit to come through. And I think now that it's come through, we're hoping that some other drivers. I mean, I've carried a lot of the load here with Uber already, so I'm hoping maybe some other drivers will pick up the crusade here for justice, the crusade for equality.
That lawsuit can break the
I'm saying, like, look, we need to take back the airport, period. We take back SFO, like tomorrow.
Go ahead, and then we'll.
I just wanted to say that the SFTWA at their general meeting next week, Matt Gonzalez, who's one of the attorneys for that lawsuit, is gonna be here and speaking in this
Right
room.
here?
Yeah.
When next week?
Was it Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, 6 o'clock. All right, somebody has a flyer about it. There's going to be a general meeting of the San Francisco Taxi Workers Alliance. And the guest speaker will be Matt Gonzalez, former president of the Board of Supervisors, and also a partner in the company that has majority ownership of Flywheel Cab. He's going to talk in depth about the Flywheel lawsuit, which is a constitutional challenge to the CPUC's authority to regulate Uber and Lyft. And, the partial list of differences between taxi regulation and Uber and Lyft regulation as conducted by the CPUC is giving grounds for this lawsuit, which is based on, constitutional protection against, unequal treatment.
He's not one of the lawyers in the suit, but he's partner in Flywheel, yeah.
Let's take a couple other questions and, yeah.
How you guys doing? Thank you for hosting this tonight. I just was wondering, what do you guys see as a flashpoint that will possibly bring Uber and Lyft drivers
Yoo-hoo.
together with the taxi drivers?
We want to know too.
I don't see politics as being the answer. If the DNC, Uber is their designated company over in Oakland, they lost the tribute power. So if there's 9,000 taxi drivers, how many Uber and Lyft drivers, you guys can shut down the city? I mean, it goes even beyond that because Uber's getting into ambulance driving now. Out in Livermore, they're trying to replace bus drivers with Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. So do you think there's a flashpoint where everyone can come together?
No, actually, yeah, there is. There's actually a flashpoint. I mean, I know a lot of bus drivers. I'm not going to say their names, but some of the bus drivers at the airport, the guys that drive the blue buses, they are fed up with what's going on at SFO because they were a lot of like former. No, not Super Shuttle too, but like even the guys that just drive, the blue buses that go from the long-term parking lot, this the big blue ones that drive around, their job has become 1,000 times harder for the last years because of the congestion. And I know some of the bus owners from certain motor coach companies, the Motor Coach Association, they actually, where the TNC lot is on San Bernardino Avenue, they just lost like 10 spaces in their staging area to make the new TNC lot. So they are pissed about it too right now because they have to get permits and stickers just like we do every year. And they're installed by the airport, by the way. So.
Kara had,
One of the problems with this is that, well, I was an assistant cat herder at United Taxi Cab Workers for a fair number of years, and getting people organized and to do things is very difficult to begin with, especially the cab driver personalities and the fact that we were all independent contractors. But at least there were central places where you could find cab drivers. One of the problems with organizing anything with Uber and Lyft drivers is there's no there.
Cell phone
There's-
lot at SFO.
The cell phone, there are some places where some of them congregate the cell phone lot at SFO. There are a few places, but in terms of spreading the word over what they should be
They're trying to
looking
organize
for, it's very
too, but
difficult.
they're trying to organize themselves, but the problem is that some of them will try to align themselves with taxi drivers, and taxi drivers will chase them away, and then there's a lot of them who hate taxi drivers, so it's, there's still a lot of
But in
bridges
terms
to
of
cross.
workers, it's very tough to organize people with no there.
I'm just gonna say the reason that I don't know if there is a flashpoint, I think the flashpoint would be when they start playing by the same rules, because the way cab drivers see Lyft and Uber drivers is as cheaters. They're stealing from us because we have to follow certain rules, and they're breaking those rules that we have been working by for decades, all our whole career.
Yeah.
And they're coming out and saying, "Oh, we don't have to follow those rules.
Yeah, there's no
We can do
airport
what we
stickers,
want."
why don't they have to go to the airport
Yeah.
every year like we do every year
Yeah.
and have had a sticker put on their cab?
So
and
there's
pay,
a lot of
I mean,
incredible resentment among cab drivers of these, Uber and Lyft drivers.
And then they
Is it-
use taxi
Yeah.
lanes and taxi.
a tech worker as a taxi driver, who are like, you know what? Can you take me to like the moving place and the document shredding place on like, you know, Collingwood? Because they're like, I gotta move, I'm moving to another part of the city because I can't afford to live here anymore. You get those people to join too. I mean, you go after, the best way to go after Ed Lee is just to go after Airbnb, and like Uber and Lyft will go right after. Just go after, join the Airbnb, you know, housing move, because housing affects everybody.
Everybody. I mean,
And housing
it's a
affects
general-
everybody.
It's a general social crisis.
I mean, I tell you what, like Airbnb has hurt my family because, you know what, my family owns property in the Bay Area, right? You know, my family bought property like in San Mateo County. We just got hit with like a $2,000 property tax raise this year. Because the cities are now assessing our property value at more money because of Airbnb. And we're just like legitimate homeowners living in our own fucking house that don't rent out anything to anybody.
They're forcing people to be hotel operators.
But they're taxing everybody now as a hotel operator because of the value of the property.
And the city is allowing Airbnb to get away with it.
Because they get the money. It's a property tax. I'm telling you, man. I mean, I tell you what, you know what? You want to go after Airbnb, man? Find somebody that has paid overinflated rent for the last 3 years and take because my whole thing is like, you take Airbnb to court in a class action lawsuits, you would have like 3 classes. You would have somebody who's paid overinflated rent in the Bay Area by 25 to 30% as a damage. You would have a homeowner who bought a house in this overinflated market who's paid too much money for their house, and you would have property owners like my family who are now paying higher property tax than they ever did before, you know, because they paid an extra $2 to $3 grand on their property that was already, you know, because of the Airbnb valuations. So that's, I think, the biggest thing. Go after Airbnb, man. 888, Brandon, dude. I mean, go out and get some people, man. So start like having protests and stuff out there, like real protests.
Okay,
You know,
so,
like amateur hour stuff.
We have Barry, and then we're gonna go to this gentleman over here, and then we'll go over here.
Addressing your question about the, you know, the
Tipping point.
or the tipping point or cab drivers. I think, and what you're saying is right. I think it's exactly right that you can't support deregulation and also be pro-labor or pro, you know, what this is doing is destroying career jobs. Like, you can't make cab driving a career, you know. So I think the Teamsters have confused the issue by trying to organize Lyft and Uber drivers or Uber drivers who are for deregulation. You know, so they're supporting this, they're legitimizing this deregulated form of transportation instead of getting everybody to play by the same rules. They wouldn't organize, I don't think, unlicensed plumbers or unlicensed construction workers against licensed construction workers or licensed plumbers, which is exactly what's happening here. You know, and you know, I think there's a problem in the labor movement in that issue, that the Teamsters are not really looking at this, and that it's the same thing, maybe because we're cab drivers or there's not as many of us, there's not the money, you know, available for them, you know, so they're not considering what it's doing to cab drivers.
Everything, I mean, the janitors, they have a strike in San Francisco, their contract expires on the 31st. The janitor companies now want everybody to be on an app. They want all the janitors to be on an app as a temporary worker.
That's
And
ridiculous.
no, that's what's happening right now. So it's not just taxi cab. They want everybody like on an app. And you only work when your app calls, and you work through the app. And that's one of the issues in this janitor struggle. So there's a basis to unify all working people and say, we're all getting screwed. It's not just taxi cab drivers, janitors, every job, doctors. I mean, if they can get anybody in an app, and you only work when you're called, you know, I mean, that's what they're gonna do. And it's great money.
Yeah, these are some of the wider, you know, societal issues that this whole thing raises. But let's go over here.
Yeah, so I really agree with Steve, this connects to the larger aspect of trouble. But I wanted to ask specifically about Tarway's inequities under the ADA. And I want to ask about that, just more details about inequities under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the prospects for lawsuits against Uber and Lyft under the ADA.
Well, Uber and Lyft have, well, Uber particularly has said that, well, one of the things when the rules were promulgated by the California Public Utilities Commission was that Uber and Lyft would have to turn in information about how many people with disabilities requested service, how many were of those requests were fulfilled, and how many were unable to be fulfilled. and they have fought tooth and nail on even giving up that information. In the second part of the rulemaking, a year and a half or so after the first part, there was panel after panel. Everybody was supposed to review how had the rules gone and what needs to be changed. And panel after panel, but especially the disabilities panel, was saying, well, we don't know because we can't get data because they refuse to even give the information that by law they're supposed to give. So it's very difficult in that way. The taxi cabs, being common carriers, are required to provide a service under ADA. And at one time, we had 75 wheelchair accessible taxis. We have meters that can be audible that will tell you each time the meter changes for those who are deaf. It has to be, there are so many provisions of the ADA that cabs are subject to that Uber has decided, well, it's not a profitable sector, so screw it. And I'm sure that Rua can tell you more about this. I was on the Paratransit Coordinating Council for 8 years on the executive board. That's part of MUNI's outreach to the disabled and seniors. And so this has been an ongoing issue. And disabled people are actually getting far less service now because there are fewer people in the cab industry willing to take on the burden of these very expensive vehicles that break down often, and they're getting much poorer service, and there is no substitute.
There are no Uber or Lyft ramp taxis.
So I asked this question because,
And they can be shut down. It's the same logic, they can just close them down. You can't,
Right.
you know, I mean, in other words, if you violate the law, you can be shut down. You say, you're not serving disability, we're shutting you down.
Right,
That's
and
all.
the ADA says has to be the same kind of access for standards and service for people with disabilities as there are for able-bodied people. But you're right, the state is absolutely not doing anything about that.
Some areas like San Mateo County, you're gonna pay like more money for property tax now. If they come in and they do like an annual assessment, like when during like the Great Recession, right, 2010, you paid less in property tax, but now we're paying about like 33% more since the Airbnb, from 9,000 to 12,000 a year. So that's $3,000 bucks. Like, well, you know what? They just went the vacation, they just went the savings account. You know what I mean? So it's like, I mean, I even see it as a taxi driver. You know, I'm like, hey, that's why some of these people probably are forced to take these ultra cheap TNCs, is because their disposable income, how they get to and from an event, matters now. That's a factor, you know what I mean? And the problem thing, I mean, you have to realize the big picture, a lot of people don't care about you as a taxi driver. They're not gonna say yes, but they do care about is like cheaper housing. So you just go where the big yes is and just go with it. That's like the best strategy I can say to any people like, don't fight us, just join the Airbnb, like the people that did the tech tax protest last Wednesday in front of Twitter and Uber. Join them, because then you become part of like a bigger movement. You know, you have more people in your movement, they're gonna say yes, and not just look at it as a tax driver, but as a part of a greater scheme of people that are being oppressed by like this tech regime, like these new tech people. Like that's what my end game strategy is, you know.
But I think I wonder if there's a way they could challenge that higher property tax, because it seems like that's another thing, just like the higher rent sets, an attempt to drive out the working class people
Well,
from the
no, but
Bay
it is. I
Area.
mean, it's because Airbnb is illegal activity where they let people rent a house year round and don't do anything about it. You know, like they break the city rules. That's what's causing a housing shortage, which in turn raises rent and raises property values, and then in turn property tax.
Okay, this is an interesting subject, but it's a little long.
Well, just look at the congestion that we went from being the 6th most congested city, and then 3 years later, we're the 2nd most congested city. And the air pollution, went from not being listed in the top 25 most polluted areas, now we're number 6. So it's a matter of getting around. In fact, I read, it was Stephen Hill wrote an article one time about how people were even admitting that, yeah, well, maybe I get the Lyft or Uber car faster, but it takes me 20 minutes longer to get where I'm going. So one of the reasons that on-demand taxi service is regulated by numbers is because it causes so much congestion and pollution and wear and tear to the road. So that's why there needs to be a limit, not to mention the ability of the drivers to make a living. Cabs are limited to their numbers. The problem is the TNCs or the Uber and Lyfts where there's no limit to their numbers, and there's 37,000 of them.
Deregulated.
Yeah. That's why, yeah.
Deregulation is creating chaos. So if you go after Ed Lee, blame it on Ed Lee, and you list all the things that are going on, Airbnb and everything else, then
You
people
get everybody,
make-
you get,
people make the connection.
you get everybody.
And actually, if you knock him out, you know, that would be a warning to every other politician in San Francisco, oh, they're after.
No, I'm thinking like, no, man. I mean, I'm getting ready to throw like some of my activism in the mission and stuff. It's gonna get pretty real. Like, you know, like I'm gonna have some piñata parties with Ed Lee this summer. We're gonna start getting piñatas.
The gentleman there, earlier I said I'm very proud of knowing this city well. I'm very proud of being able to provide you much better service than a quick press of the button on an app to order an Uber or Lyft. I take a lot of pride for knowing this city very well, and that's why I take this Uber and Lyft influx so hard, because all my full 27 years, it's going to be full 28 years in January next year, I have tried my very best to be a very professional cab driver. But if you never drove a cab, you have no idea what we go through. We endure punishment. In my case, I never lost my accent because I came here as an adult. You have no idea of the stupid questions people ask me with no respect. They say, oh, you're from Brazil. Did you leave Brazil running away from crime and corruption? And I go, well, by the way, have you heard of Uber? Have you seen how heavily they're lobbying in City Hall, State Capitol? So if you never drove a cab, you just cannot see or understand what we go through. Another thing that my colleagues can agree with, the trust issue. People get into your cab and they say, 10th Avenue and Geary. Before you make one turn, they ask, where the F are you going? And you have to prepare yourself to diffuse that lack of trust. So, but the hardest thing of all this with the Uber influx is to go to the elected and appointed officials to make our voices heard, and they look at us as a bunch of worthless scum of the earth cab drivers. That bothers me tremendously, but I appreciate your sympathy to our cause, and I appreciate everybody else who came here, but that's what we are up against. Barry said, when Mark and I went to the end of June, we were the Energy Committee in the Senate. We made very intelligent arguments against AB 2763. As I'm speaking, I'm trying to make eye contact with the senators. They're checking the time and they're having side conversations. And before we finish our comments, not even the chair of the committee is already trying to speak over the chair to make a motion to pass the bill, and the bill passed unanimously. So that's what we are up against. I hope we can win. I'll never give up fighting, but it's tough. The lack of respect goes from the passengers all the way to our elected officials, even our governor.
Well, does anybody else have any concluding remarks? Rua?
Yeah. What everybody on this panel is trying to say is cab drivers are professional drivers. Uber drivers are casual drivers. One of the things that I point out to my students, I've got a police film from Boston that says the average new cab driver has 3 collisions in their first year. The average cab driver has 1 collision in a year. Well, that just sort of tells you that there's something that you got to know about. Just beyond if I can drive a car, that means I can drive a cab. A full-time cab driver is probably driving about 6 times as much in 1 year as the average American car driver. You learn something in that six times as much. We've got a bunch of professional drivers here, and I think they need our appreciation.
Well, we will conclude with that, and Larry, did you have?
Yeah, I'm just gonna add, but because I started to say something earlier about this, that, you know, people, because most people can drive, they don't really respect driving as an occupation, or that there's, as a profession, you know, that there's any, that you get any better at it. But when you're doing anything all day long, every day, for years on end, for decades, you become way better at it. You know, I compare myself to like the Blue Angels or somebody walking a tightrope at a circus, you know, like we can do stuff that a regular driver doesn't think about. And you're doing it while somebody in the back seat is yelling at you, making a bunch of noise and doing all this stuff and telling you where to go, and you're doing all these different things at once. And I would say maybe an average rookie cab driver would be maybe 5% of the cab drivers would be, in general, rookies. About 90% of the Uber and Lyft drivers are rookie drivers. They don't, even the longest term ones have only been doing it 4 or 5 years, tops. You know, cab drivers, most of them have been doing it 10 or 20 years or more. You know, so, and a lot of these Uber and Lyft drivers do it for 6 months. You know, and they're out there doing the same thing. They got people talking in the back seat. They're dealing with all these weird traffic situations over and over all day long, and they're not used to paying the attention that you need to pay to not get in a wreck. And that's why most cab drivers or any professional drivers gets in a couple wrecks the first 2 years. And then actually, I think one a year is overstating. I don't think most cab drivers get in a wreck maybe once every 5 years or 10 years.
Once you've been driving 10 years, you probably don't
Yeah.
have more than one accident
Right,
in 10 years.
right.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.